Okay, Parshas Vayeishev, page 198 in the Artscroll Chumash. Let's discuss some of the psukim and what we can learn from them. I want to focus on today the selling of Yosef. The brothers sold Yosef. Did they do something wrong? Was Yosef deserving of it? And we'll see. Let's start reading some of the verses. Vayeishev Yaakov ve'eretz migurei aviv. So we have Yaakov. He was living in the land of his father, Be'eretz Canaan, in the land of Canaan. Eila told us Yaakov, Yosef ben Shva Esrei Shana, Hayoroa es Echav Batson, Vehunar, as Bnei Vilchav, as Bnei Zilpa, Neshei Avi, Vayav Yosef, as Dibasam Ra El Aviyam. So Yosef was 17 years old. He was tending to the flocks, and he was with the children of Bilhah and Zilpah, right, because they were the children of the maidservants, not the children of Leah, who were kind of looked down upon by the brothers, and he hung out with them. And it says that Yosef, Vayav Yosef, as Dibasam Ra El Aviyam, he brought a bad report. Yosef brought a bad report to his father Yaakov about his brothers. So let's see what Rashi says on that pasuk. As Dibasam Ra, you see the Rashi there? Yeah. Okay, so it's in the middle of the Rashi on pasuk Beis. As Dibasam Ra. Everything bad that Yosef saw his brothers doing, he would report to his father Yaakov. They were eating the limb from a live animal. Right, that's something that, right, even though the Torah wasn't given, that's something that we know that all Bnei Noach, all children of Noah and all of humankind are prohibited against from eating the limb of a live animal. And Yosef seemingly saw his brothers doing that, and he reported it to his father. And they were denigrating the children of the Shvachos, the children of Bilhah and Zilpah. They were calling them servants. And he also thought that the brothers were committing acts of sexual immorality. Okay, fine. No, I'm not going to read that part. So, how could it be that the brothers were committing these horrible, horrible acts, right? These are the 12 tribes. How could they be doing this? Seemingly, Yosef saw them doing these horrible things, which were prohibited. They were doing acts of sexual immorality. They were eating Aver Menachai, a limb from a live animal, right? That's like tearing a limb off of an animal and then eating it. And he was telling his father about it. So, were the tribes actually doing something wrong? What was he seeing? What's the deal? So if you look in the Sifsei Chachamim, you don't have it in that Chumash, but in the standard Mikras Gedolos Chumash, you have the Sifsei Chachamim, which is a commentary on Rashi, which I learned that the proper word is a super commentary. A commentary on a commentary is called a super commentary. So he writes that the brothers weren't actually doing these things, but it gave the appearance that they were doing these things. For instance, he says, Aver Menachai, eating a limb from a live animal. What the case was, that was a Mifar Cheses. Have you ever heard of Mifar Cheses before? Mifar Cheses is when, and after an animal is slaughtered, after
it's moving,
right, after we shecht its windpipe and esophagus, which are the two parts of an animal that need to be slit to make the animal kosher. The animal moves around, so the animal, even though it was halachically permissible to eat, it looked like from a distance that it was in fact not kosher. That it was still alive and therefore not kosher to eat. So Yosef thought he saw his brothers eating from a limb of a live animal, and he reported it to his father. Now, did Yosef do something wrong here by reporting this? So,
he should have spoken to them.
Well, so I wanted to go over, just to review, whenever we say the laws of Lashon Hara, right, we know that it's a prohibition to speak negatively about another Jew to somebody. But there are 7 conditions that when these 7 conditions are met, one not only is permitted to speak ill of another Jew, Lashon Hara, but it could be actually a mitzvah, or it could be a necessity to speak ill of another Jew when these 7 conditions are met. So let's go over the 7 conditions, and we'll see if Yosef met all of those 7 conditions. So the first condition is that, let's say a hypothetical case. You see Ruvain goes and it looks like he steals Shimon's iPod, or no, iPhone, whatever, something valuable, his computer. So you want to go and tell Shimon that Ruvain stole his computer. So what 7 conditions have to be met to tell Shimon that Ruvain stole his computer? So the first condition is you have to see it yourself. You have to actually see Ruvain steal the computer. Now, if somebody told you that Ruvain stole the computer, that wouldn't be enough. Unless you actually clarified yourself somehow that Ruvain did it. Maybe you saw the surveillance tape and then you clarified it, but it has to be that you saw it yourself. That's the first condition. The second condition is that you have to make sure the act which was done was actually forbidden. Right? Maybe he didn't steal it. Maybe he was borrowing it and he had asked permission and you didn't know about that. Right? You have to clarify all the facts of the case to make sure that something was actually done that was prohibited. The third condition is that you have to rebuke Ruvain first. Right? You have to tell Ruvain, hey, I think you might have stolen Shimon's computer. Perhaps you should give it back. And maybe he'll give it back. If he does that, then you don't have to tell Shimon that Ruvain stole his computer. The fourth condition is that you can't exaggerate. You can't make it out worse than it was. The fifth condition is that your intent has to be litoelis. It has to be that you're trying to accomplish a goal and not for your own enjoyment. Meaning the goal of you telling Shimon that Reuven stole his computer is so he can get his computer back. You're not allowed to tell Shimon that Reuven stole his computer because you hate Reuven and you're going to enjoy it very much by making Reuven look bad. You have to do it for the right purpose and you're not allowed to get any personal enjoyment out of it. Now that could be very hard if you happen to hate the person. So I actually asked Rabbi Feldman, what happens if you actually hate the guy and we're not all perfect and we'll enjoy telling Shimon that Reuven stole his computer. So he says you're required to bring yourself to a point where you will not get enjoyment from telling Shimon that Reuven stole the computer. You have to bring yourself to that point. So that's 5. 6, it has to be impossible to accomplish what you want to accomplish any other way besides speaking the Lashon Hara. So if you could somehow get Shimon's computer back without tattling, then that's what you have to do. 7, the seventh condition is that more damage can't be caused to Reuven than what would happen if Reuven were taken to Bezdin. Let's say because of this, Shimon, Shimon is a bloodthirsty person, and if you tell Shimon is going to kill Reuven. In that case, you would not be allowed to tell Shimon, even if you fulfilled all the other 6 conditions. But if Shimon is going to, kill Reuven, or he's going to spread lies about Reuven on the internet, and he'll have to get divorced, and he will lose his job, and all these horrible things would happen. You're also not allowed to tell Shimon in that case. So if we fulfill all these 7 conditions, that's when we're allowed to speak Lashon Hara. Absent any one of those conditions, it's forbidden to speak negatively about another Jew, even when the information is true. So now, if we look at the case of Yosef here, Yosef seemingly should have clarified that it was in fact not Aver min achai, it wasn't a limb from a live animal that the brothers were eating, but in fact it was just appeared to be that he was eating the limb from a live animal because it was actually shechted properly. The animal was actually kosher to eat. But since it was still moving around, it looked like the animal was alive when in fact it wasn't. Right? But had the brothers actually been doing something wrong, and the only way to get them to correct their actions were to be to tell Yaakov so that Yaakov could teach them properly, then they would be allowed to do it. But it seemingly all those 7 conditions here weren't fulfilled. So already when we're reading the psukim, we're reading the verses, right? It just sounds like from reading the verses that Yosef was going and saying these horrible things about the brother, but as we look more into it, we realize that the case here was much more nuanced. And anytime we're talking about great people in the Chumash, we have to always understand that they are not like us. They were very spiritually elevated people, and that when we say even when they sinned, when they made mistakes, it's really they sinned in minutia. They didn't do something egregious, as it may seem, but rather it was only perhaps they erred in judgment a bit, and because of that they were punished. But it's not as such an egregious sin as it often seems. So what happened after that? So after this, Yosef was speaking bad about the brothers to Yaakov, his brothers, and then he has these dreams where he sees that the stalks of wheat are bowing down to one stalk of wheat, which symbolizes the brothers bowing down to Yosef. Now, I think it was Rav Hirsch pointed this out. It's very interesting that the brothers and him were represented by wheat stalks, because at this point in history, the Jewish people were not farmers. They were shepherds, and they were tending to sheep all day. But later on in Jewish history, we know that when they entered the land of Israel, they would predominantly be farmers in Israel, and that's why we have so many laws in the Talmud. 1/6 of the whole Talmud is about the laws of of farming and agriculture. So I think it was Rav Hirsch, I believe, who pointed this out, that his dream, Yosef's dream, was actually predicting the future of the Jewish people. So he has another dream, and he tells the brother, and he tells his father, and he tells his brothers, right? Basically, these dreams signifying that Yosef is going to rule over the brothers, and the brothers are very bothered by that. So the brothers go to Shechem, which is about 80 kilometers away, Rav Hirsch says. I didn't look it up, but I forgot how many miles are in a kilometer. But very far away, significantly far away, especially when there were no cars. It was a journey. And Yosef goes to the brothers. Then the brothers, they want to kill Yosef. Reuven saves Yosef and says, let's just sell him. And then Yosef eventually winds up in Mitzrayim. So, the question is, it seems when we're reading the verses in the Torah that the brothers were jealous of Yosef, and they did a horrible, horrible thing by selling Yosef into slavery. But were they really doing something that was so bad? What really happened here? Were the brothers of Yosef really the villains of the story? So, as we know, that in addition to Torah Shebiksav, the written Torah, we have an oral Torah, and the oral Torah teaches us how to properly interpret the written Torah. Now, right, as we know, that if we didn't have the oral Torah, we wouldn't even know how to read the vowels in the Torah, because if you take out a Torah scroll, there are no vowels, and it's only because of our oral tradition that we know how to properly even pronounce the words, and that's why we bring in Isha as a sacrifice, which is an animal, which is an offering, as opposed to an Isha, which is a woman, because even though they're spelled the same with the same letters, Aleph, Shin, Hey, it's only because of our oral tradition we know how to properly pronounce the word, and that we are bringing offerings on the altar and not women. And don't think it's so crazy, because there were peoples at that time in history that did bring humans as sacrifices. So one, we have the oral Torah, which teaches us. So anytime we go and learn a story in the Chumash, we have to take the lessons of the oral Torah and interpret the written Torah through the oral Torah, which was also given at Mount Sinai. Furthermore, one of my Rebbeim pointed out that even if you read the Chumash in the written Torah without the oral Torah, it's clear that the brothers of Yosef were not evil and did not do such an egregious sin. Perhaps they didn't do any sin. How do we know? Because the Choshen, right? The Choshen was the breastplate that the high priest wore, and it had 12 stones. What did the 12 stones represent? The 12 tribes. From the Choshen we see that the tribes were still righteous. They were righteous. In fact, that one of the holiest objects in Judaism had these 12 stones, which bared the name of the 12 tribes. So it shows that it couldn't be that the brothers of Yosef did such an egregious sin and that they were rejected by Hashem. Furthermore, the land was divided up in Israel based on the 12 tribes. You see that they didn't lose their status. And we see that through the rest of the Chumash, many other examples of how the 12 tribes still had this status. The 12 brothers still have this status, and it wasn't diminished at all by what happened with the selling of Yosef. So, if it's true that the brothers did not do such an egregious sin by selling Yosef, it seems like they did. Why? What was going on here? So, Rav Hirsch explains, based on the Sforno, and many others say this, that the brothers believed that Yosef was trying to take over, was trying to take away their portion in Olam Haba, take away their spiritual place, and also even perhaps they thought Yosef was trying to murder them. And the rule is if someone's trying to kill you, you're allowed to kill them first. And they really believe this. And Rav Aaron Kotler adds a point to this, that there's precedent to this in the history of the Jewish people. Right? Abraham had 2 children, Yishmael and Yitzchak. Yishmael got totally pushed aside, and only Yitzchak was the continuation of Abraham and the Jewish people. Yaakov and Esav, right? Their father and their uncle. Only Yaakov was a continuation of the Jewish people and not Esav. So the brothers thought that Yosef was planning to push them aside, just like Esav had gotten pushed aside and Yishmael had gotten pushed aside. Not only that, because of all the dreams he was saying and the way that he was speaking to their father and telling them all this bad stuff about them, the brothers legitimately believed that perhaps Yosef was planning to murder them and to take over. So what do the brothers do? The brothers run to Shechem, and they go there to regroup. Rav Hirsch points out, why did they go to Shechem specifically? Remember what happened in Shechem? Dinah, their sister, was abducted in Shechem, and that was the place where Shimon and Levi and the brothers got together, well, Shimon and Levi primarily, and they murdered everyone in the city. I believe the brothers were involved actually to save Dinah, and then it was just Shimon and Levi who killed the rest of the city. I forgot where I saw that. It might have been Rav Hirsch, I don't remember.
I thought they went and got the booty after Shimon Levi killed them all. They went and plundered.
Oh, okay. Could be. I thought
that's one version.
Yeah, I thought I saw they were involved also at the beginning, but I don't remember. I have to double check that. But Rav Hirsch points out that in Shechem, that's where they came together as a family and solidified themselves as a family to do something together to protect their family by saving Dinah. Right? It represented the family unity. So now they were regrouping in that same place, away from Yaakov and away from Yosef, to regroup as a family and to protect this potential threat which was coming from within the family. Right? When a soldier takes an oath, he promises to defend the Constitution, defend the country from all enemies, foreign and domestic. So they legitimately thought that they had a domestic threat. They had someone threatening the stability of their family, so they ran to Shechem, this place which represented family unity and solidarity, to go there and to regroup and decide how to handle the situation. So then what happens? All of a sudden, who comes? Yosef. They're here to regroup and decide how they're going to go forward, and all of a sudden Yosef comes. So if we look at verse Lamed Zayin Yud Ches, in the Article Chumash, it's page 202. It says, "Vayiru oso merachok." They see Yosef from afar. Ubeterem yikrav aleihem, veisnaklu oso lahamiso, and they plan to kill him. When they saw Yosef coming, they planned to kill him. However, the Sforno, Rav Hirsch points out, and it's in the Sforno, that the way he translates the pasuk is not how ArtScroll translates it, but rather based on he proved it from the various grammatical things, which I'm very poor at grammar, so I don't understand all the details, but he actually reads the pasuk as they believe that Yosef was conspiring against them to kill them. Meaning when they're in this city, trying to regroup and to enforce that familial solidarity, and they're trying to, what are we going to do about Yosef, who they really believe is out to get them, and all of a sudden Yosef comes, they really believe that Yosef was there to murder them. So at that point, they said, okay, we have to go, and we have to kill Yosef. Now, not only that, do you know the brothers, even after the fact, it doesn't seem, he points out, I forgot to refer to the Sforno. Rav Hirsch's whole thing is based on the Sforno. I forgot where one ends and one begins. But do you know that the brothers didn't even regret what they did because they didn't do anything wrong? On 236 in the Article Chumash, which is 42:21. In the 42:21 is Mem Beis Chaf Aleph.
42, that'll be Miketz.
Right. So later on, when the whole story is happening, when Yosef had become viceroy of Egypt, and the brothers were, having to leave Binyamin behind, and the whole story was coming, and they didn't realize that it was yet Yosef who was in charge. The brothers realized they did something wrong. But what did they do wrong? Vayomeru ish al achiv, they said to each other, Aval Ashemim anachnu, we sinned. Alachinu asher re'inu tsaras nafsho, v'hischananu eleinu v'lo shamanu. They said, what did we do wrong? That there was the pain of our brother, and he was asking us for mercy, and we didn't listen to him. Meaning they did do something wrong. What they did wrong was that Yosef, when they threw him in the pit, he was begging for them to not sell him and to spare him, and they didn't listen to him. They were insensitive to his pleas. But the actual act of selling him, they did the correct thing. The only thing that they regretted and that they did wrong was that, in fact, they were insensitive to Yosef for what they did.
That's what they thought.
Right. And it seems to be that, I think the Sfornos, or in the Rav Hirsch, are bringing it as a proof that the actual selling of Yosef wasn't really such a sin. It was only the fact that they were insensitive to him in doing so, and that they didn't hear his pleas, that was what they regretted. And that could be what they did wrong. But the actual selling, they thought they were totally justified. Meaning if someone is coming to kill you, you really believe someone's trying to murder you, then you have every right to protect yourself. Now Rav Ruderman actually goes a step further. He quotes Midrashim that actually say the selling of Yosef was a merit for the brothers. It was a schus, right? It says, I'll read part of the Midrash here. There's two of them. One's in Bereshis Rabbah, Pei Daled, Yud Zayin. It says, Amar of Acha bar Zeira, Aveirasan shel Shvatim zechore hi la'olam, tikve hi la'olam. He says the quote unquote the sin of the tribes will be remembered forever, and it's hope for the world. Meaning it was a positive thing. Even though it was technically a sin, it was a positive thing. Then he brings another medrash in Bamidbar Rabbah, Naso Yud Gimel Yud Ches. It says, Afal Pisha Ir L'Shvatim Shabali Yadei Mechiras Yosef. Even though the selling of Joseph came through the hands of the tribes, At Savar Shelo Haya Bo Liyadam Oso Amaisa Alim Ken Hayu Rishayim B'Maisa Echerim. Do you think it would only come to their hands if it was evil? Lav, it's not true. Elat Tzadikim Gimurim Hayu. They were totally righteous. V'lo Bo Liyadam Chid Me'olam, and they never sinned. I mean, according to these midrashim, you see that they were totally righteous, and they were actually right in selling Yosef. Now, what's the reason? The reason is because the selling of Yosef was all part of Hashem's plan. Hashem's plan was, we see in hindsight, is that the Jewish people had to go down to Egypt. They had to be enslaved by Pharaoh, and there had to be miracles that were performed on behalf of the Jewish people to demonstrate to the world that God is in charge, and He runs the world, and He punishes the wicked. And that could only happen through the selling of Yosef. So the selling of Yosef was all leading up to God's plan, and as we know, after the Jews were taken out of Egypt, they got the Torah at Mount Sinai, where they became the chosen people to represent to humanity what God wants from the world, to how to live a spiritual and holy life. That's through getting of the Torah and following the mitzvos and studying Torah. And that could only happen through the selling of Yosef, which eventually, as we know, Yosef wound up in Egypt. That's how it all began. So since they were all part of God's plan, the tribes were actually tzaddikim, they were righteous in what they did. Now, also, what about their thoughts, right? He says that the action that they did was righteous because this had to happen to be part of God's plan. Furthermore, their thoughts were righteous because, as we mentioned, they legitimately thought Yosef was trying to destroy them. So therefore, their action was correct and their thoughts were correct. Now then, Rav Ruderman points out, however, there's a famous medrash. I'm surprised you didn't ask me this. I know you know it. The medrash that we read on Tisha B'Av and Yom Kippur about the 10 martyrs.
I was going to ask you that.
I knew you were going to ask me that. So Rav Ruderman himself asked this question, that it seems to be that the 10 martyrs, the 10 holy rabbis that were murdered by the Romans after the Second Temple was destroyed, was an atonement for the selling of Yosef by the 10 brothers. So Rav Ruderman writes that yes, there was an element of sin, but the point is that since the tribes, the brothers, were so righteous, we know that Hashem is medaktik with tzaddikim kichut hasayra. He's exceedingly precise in judgment on very righteous people. People that are on a very elevated level, they're obviously expected to act better than your average person. And since we're talking about the Shiftei Kal, the tribes that would be the foundation of the Jewish people and were some of the holiest people to ever exist, so God was exceedingly strict in the way He judged them because they were on such a high level. They should have known better. So they erred in a little bit in their judgment, right? Had Yosef been clarified more about what the brothers were doing, he would have known that the brothers weren't doing something wrong. And also, had the brothers clarified Yosef's true intentions and put more effort, perhaps they would not have sold Yosef, and would have avoided the whole issue. Okay. Furthermore, any questions so far?
No,
All good?
actually,
Yep.
I thought there was something about, I read somewhere that their sin was they kidnapped. It's like they're kidnapping their brother and selling him. Right.
That's the Medrash says that the sin was that the kidnapping in the Torah. A kidnapper deserves the death penalty. That's why the 10 martyrs, to atone for the sin of the tribes.
Right. So that they did sin with the kidnap.
Right. Oh, you're saying before I said, like, right, I am quoting from Rav Ruderman, so it is possible that he's disagreeing with what Rav Hirsch said, which is possible. Mm-hmm. Right. You're saying that before I mentioned from Rav Hirsch that it sounds like the actual kidnapping wasn't a sin, just that they were insensitive, but from what Rav Ruderman's saying, or from that medrash, it does sound like the actual kidnapping was in the element of sin. Right. I have to look more into that, but it could be that they're saying different aspects. Whatever it is, the commonality is that their sin was being
insensitive.
Right. It was either being insensitive to a certain point, or it was a misjudgment, a small misjudgment. Okay. So further on the selling of Yosef, would like to just say, so before one more point on that, it's interesting why. All good. There's a question: why were the Egyptians punished for enslaving the Jews? Right, off topic for a little bit. Why were the Egyptians punished? So, what's the question? It says, "V'gamas hagoy asher ya'avodu." Hashem decreed that the Jewish people will be enslaved, and He says that the nation which enslaves you are going to be punished. So the commentaries are bothered. Well, if God says that a nation is going to enslave you, how could you be punished for something which God says is going to happen?
Because they overdid it.
Right. So the Ramban writes that the reason that they were punished, the Egyptians, was because they did more than they were supposed to. They put babies into the wall. They threw the babies in the river, and they did all these horrible things. So that's why they were punished. But the Ramban, it seems to hold that if a person is doing something that Hashem wants to fulfill Hashem's will, then it's all fine. And I just thought that was similar to this case of the way Rav Ruderman is explaining the selling of Yosef, that Yosef needed to be sold into Egypt because of God's plan for the Jewish people, that they had to go into Egypt and be slaves there and then be redeemed and then get the Torah. So it sounds like since the brothers were doing something that was what Hashem wanted and part of Hashem's plan, it differed from the Egyptians who, had they just enslaved the Jews and not been so brutal to them, they wouldn't have been punished. Now the Rambam gives a different answer, which I don't think actually fits with that, because he says the reason that the Egyptians were punished is because Hashem never said which nation would enslave the Jews, and the Egyptians were the ones who did it. So no one said the Egyptians had to enslave the Jews, just that a nation had to enslave the Jews, and since the Egyptians did that, they were doing something wrong. So I don't think that would fit with what we were learning here. Okay, and I just want to conclude with one more aspect about the selling of Yosef. I think the Chavetz Chaim points this out. If we look at the selling of Yosef, it looks like a horrible, horrible thing. Yaakov was in mourning for 22 years. He thought his son was dead. Yosef was in jail for many years, right? He gets sold as a slave to Potiphar. Potiphar seduces him and then lies about him, and then he's thrown into jail, and all these horrible, horrible things are happening. Can you imagine the pain that Yaakov had thinking his son was dead for so many years? And at the end of the day, we realize that was all part of God's plan, and because of that, the Jewish people came into existence, and fulfilling, basically, because of this story, fulfilling God's plan for all of humanity. So the Chavetz Chaim said, it's like, something which seems on the surface to be a horrible thing turns out in reality to be one of the best things. And the Chavetz Chaim says a parable that there's a guy who comes to a shul in a different community. He goes to the synagogue, and they're reading the Torah, all right? And we honor 7 people with aliyahs on the Torah. And this visitor notices that all the people they're honoring for the Torah are like the lowly people in the community, right? They're totally neglecting the Torah scholars or the people who donate money to keep the shul going, and all the important people and the prestigious people aren't getting aliyahs. And the visitor says, what kind of synagogue is this? They're giving aliyahs to such lowly people, unimportant people, and not Torah scholars? So he goes up to the Gabbai and he says, how could you do this? How can you degrade such great people and not give them honors to the Torah? So the Gabbai says to him, he says, you're a fool. You came here 1 week. He says, last week we gave an aliyah to that Torah scholar. And the week before we gave it to that wealthy man who supports the community. And the week before we gave it to that prestigious person. You can't make a judgment of just seeing 1 week and all of the potential things that happen on all the other weeks. And the Chavetz Chaim says the same with our lives. We're here in this world for 70 years, 80 years, God willing more, 120 years, but still, that's only a small window into all of human history. We can't judge things that happen in our lives and say, oh, things are so horrible because we don't have the full picture, right? It's similar, I've said this analogy many times, this parable many times, that it's like a person looking through a keyhole and he sees someone taking a knife into someone's head, so he breaks open the door, he says, stop what you're doing, and he doesn't realize that it was a surgery and they're really trying to save the guy's life by giving him brain surgery. Right? We don't always know the whole situation. If we would just look in the window at Mechiras Yosef, the selling of Joseph at that time, it looks like a horrible thing, but in reality it was really a very important thing and a vital thing for human history. And if I could just conclude with Tevye. Tevye from Fiddler on the Roof says in the song, If I Were a Rich Man, would it ruin some vast eternal plan if I were a wealthy man? Right? He was complaining that he was poor. And he says, God, is it really so vital in my personal situation to all of human history? And the answer is maybe yes. Maybe yes. Maybe certain suffering we have to endure, just like Yosef had to endure certain suffering and Yaakov endured certain suffering, because that was the plan. That was God's plan. And just looking in this small window, we can never really know the totality of everything.